In this Assassin's Creed Shadow review, we'll be taking an in-depth look at the latest installment of the Assassin's Creed franchise, which is set in Japan during the Sengoku period. As most of you know, the game has generated a lot of controversy over the past year due to its choice of protagonist, so there will be a lot of agenda-driven opinions cluttering the reviews of this game at launch. For our review, I want to say this will probably be one of the most controversial reviews we've ever done, because I won't shy away from criticism or praise, and I will be brutally honest about my feelings. This isn't a bashing review, nor one that simply praises the game, and our scoring system takes into account factors like game size and price point, so if you plan to skip right to the end without listening through, don't be surprised that other factors affect the final score. If you truly care about a nuanced opinion on whether Assassin's Creed Shadows is a game worth buying and want to get a good understanding of what you can expect from this title, sit back and listen all the way to the end so I can explain why Assassin's Creed Shadows is both the best and worst Assassin's Creed I've played in recent memory. Assassin's Creed Shadows takes its particular brand of historical fiction to Sengoku, Japan, which is a period of strife and war that extended over 150 years and completely reshaped the country, both politically and socioeconomically. The real-life scale of battles, machinations, horse trading, and backstabbing that took place during this period puts fictional Game of Thrones to shame, which means it's a very fertile ground for historical narratives and thus incredibly popular with writers of books, manga, anime, movies, and TV series. Not to mention video games. Ubisoft has finally turned its gaze east and delivered its new open-world formula for Assassin's Creed Japan that fans were so eagerly anticipating after successful ventures into Egypt, Greece, and the Nordic invasion of Britain. With a setting as rich and dramatic as Sengoku, that saw the incredibly convenient rise of the shinobi for an assassin game, and with so much material to draw inspiration from, it seemed like the story aspect would be an easy slam dunk for the developers. Unfortunately, though, this is not the case. While Assassin's Creed Shadows is an easy 10 of 10 in terms of setting and gives developers the upper hand for an amazing story, the historical events you're embroiled with are very, very complex, and the avalanche of names, clans, and titles will probably be a bit disconcerting, if not overwhelming, for most non-Japanese players. I'm very familiar with the time period and its personality, so I didn't have trouble following the story, but due to the absence of an in-game codex about characters and timelines, I fear a lot of what happens will seem disjointed to the average gamer. If you want to understand a bit more about this period in particular, you can check out our video on the Battle of Sekigahara or the lore page on the NeoWiki, as it gives some context to the setting that may help you keep up with who is who. But it's not just the complexity of the time that makes the story unsuccessful, but rather two major creative choices from Ubisoft that compound other smaller challenges. The first issue is that for reasons unknown that I still cannot wrap my head around, this specific Assassin's Creed does not feature a single fictional protagonist, but instead introduces two, one fictional and one very loosely based on a minor historical figure. This is not like Odyssey, where you could choose to play one of two siblings and what was a gameplay mechanic for gender accessibility to let you pick a man or a woman. In Assassin's Creed Shadows, you will have to play as two distinct characters with their own set of skills, motivations, and opinions. From this very concept, the storytelling begins on the back foot, as it takes extreme nuance to make you, the player, fully identify and immerse into two completely different points of view, and this kind of perspective swapping usually doesn't deliver, and typically only sometimes works for more linear action-adventure games that give you chapters which have clear cuts between your protagonists. In this game, you begin the story as one character who you play briefly, then jump to the next one for quite a lot of time, then juggle back and forth between them to progress the main quest and explore the many side quests and activities that are reserved for one character or the other in the open world. This is both a gameplay and story issue, as it creates disassociation and frequently pulls you out of what has been a huge effort to make an immersive world. The second issue is the choice of making Yasuke a historically factual, may-have-been samurai from maybe Mozambique, the featured male protagonist of the game. The choice was puzzling to many, so Ubisoft themselves put out a post directed at offended Japanese gamers, acknowledging that the historical status of this person is disputed, and highlighted that they are trying to create immersive historical fiction, and this representation is simply creative license. And I'll quote it here for clarity. While we strive for authenticity in everything we do, Assassin's Creed games are works of fiction inspired by real historical events and figures. From its inception, the series has taken creative license and incorporated fantasy elements to craft engaging and immersive experiences. The representation of Yasuke in our game is an illustration of this. His unique and mysterious life made him an ideal candidate to tell an Assassin's Creed story, with the setting of feudal Japan as a backdrop. While Yasuke is depicted as a samurai in Assassin's Creed Shadows, we acknowledge that this is a matter of debate and discussion. This means that for whatever reason, Ubisoft felt that their game set in Japan didn't need a Japanese male lead, and that it was better to tell the Assassin's Creed story from an African's adventure in Japan, with Japan itself as a backdrop. Though this was definitely not what I was expecting, as I wanted to experience a true samurai tale like Ghost of Tsushima, rising through the ranks and build a clan as a samurai. It is in the end a creative choice. This is historical fiction, a fabrication based on history, and its purpose is entertainment, so I just rolled with it to see what Ubisoft did with this concept. What I found was that the Yasuke protagonist doesn't really deliver much of an Assassin's Creed story, and what it does present doesn't work, and it seems to not work very specifically because of choices made regarding the two protagonists. On one hand, you have Naoe. Her journey and motivations are plausible, and to me she feels like the actual protagonist of the game, and the one really telling the Assassin's Creed story, as she's an Iga shinobi that sneaks around kind of like an assassin. But more importantly, her character grows and develops as you play. Compelling storytelling is almost always due to compelling character development, and while Naoe has a clear motivation and experiences that lead to changes in her thinking and actions, Yasuke simply never changes or grows throughout the entire game. You meet Servant Yasuke as an honorable, charming, strong warrior. You then fast forward a bit to Samurai Yasuke, who is an honorable, charming, strong warrior. Nothing changes at all, and the actual journey from Servant to Samurai is fast forwarded, lacks depth, challenge, or world building, and ultimately presents you with what feels like a Japanese person wearing a Yasuke costume. And I say this largely because besides children, the people Yasuke meets in his travels barely ever acknowledge he is a foreigner. They never react strangely or interested, and they interact with him as though he isn't any different than any other lord. People bow to him as if he's the shogun or daimyo, the ladies can't get enough of him, and the tiny locals have no chance against his physical prowess, including the most experienced and hardened generals, warriors, and shinobis of the time period that have been training and waging war their entire lives. The result is that I generally felt incredibly out of place when playing Yasuke. To top it all off, Yasuke's African heritage is never even explored, and ignored completely, to be replaced with an uncanny capacity to camouflage as a knowledgeable veteran samurai, which is a disservice to the historical Yasuke, it's a disservice to the unrealized Japanese male lead that could have been, a disservice to the game and series itself that prides on depth of research and immersion, and a disservice to you, the player. If besides physical appearance it's almost impossible to see Yasuke as anything other than Japanese, it really begs the question, why wasn't the protagonist Japanese? We don't find out. The background glimpses of his story are a reductive attempt to retrofit motivation near the end of the game, and maybe the DLC will expound on it, but what you're getting now is simply not satisfying and does not explain this. These strange creative choices are exacerbated by a story hampered by the open-world gameplay that really affects the pacing and tempo. Once you're past the painfully slow start of the game and free in the open world, your objectives do not flow from one to the next, and the main story of the game is lost between bitsy side objectives and not even marked as a main story. So you find yourself constantly checking objectives to pick one target, only to find you must do 4 independent small side quests to unlock it. Most of these quests have none or very short dialogues or cutscenes, and the actual confrontation with the big bad guys is almost always disappointingly anticlimactic. The overarching and modern-day story part of Assassin's Creed is not really expanded on, and rather monotonously crammed into some animus anomalies that made my eyes roll with their Bond villain feels. Again, all of this is extremely disappointing, given that it's so clear and obvious that so much research and love has gone into crafting this world and game. That developer passion towards the period should not be understated or lost in the fact that their narrative and pacing didn't come together, as it's still a passable story with an amazing setting and incredibly rich culture as background, which is probably all that can be asked for given the series' past entries. And of course, there will be the voice about how people are not playing Assassin's Creed for the story, and I hear you on that. I have been playing Assassin's Creed since the very first one, which I 100%ed, because I just had to get all those flags, and I've also completed the relaunch-style games like Origins, Odyssey, and Valhalla, including all DLCs and expansions. So I know what to expect in terms of story, and unfortunately, this installment fell short for me, and I'm unsure if the planned DLC can actually change much of this. I hope some of it will go towards yokai and the supernatural as the other games have done, which is probably my favorite part of any of the games. Elysium and Valhalla were amazing locations to discover and play in. But what you really care about is the gameplay, so let's move on to that. Assassin's Creed Shadows follows the open-world gameplay formula that took off with Origins and has been carefully refined and optimized with each installment. It offers a massive open-world playground packed with activities, multiple progression paths, outstanding vistas, and even cultural deep dives to help immerse you in the history of the land. In this sense, the gameplay is open-world Assassin's Creed at its very best. Japan feels massive and the world has depth. It feels populated. There are so many unique and interesting things to do. I was thrilled when the world opened up and I could finally explore all these amazing locales and discover their history, culture, and the smaller stories told within. Unfortunately, though, the double protagonist approach means that your stealth and warrior gameplay are divided into two characters, so you have to swap back and forth between them and adapt to the playstyle of each. There's almost no stealth or parkour with Yasuke, who can wield large weapons, bows, and medieval rifles. And there's no strength with Naoe, who can sneak about but will not have access to samurai activities like learning katas, participating in mounted archery, or moving large blocks to explore ancient tombs. Each character has its own skill tree, equipment, quests, and objectives, which feels a bit like these two people together make what would normally be one protagonist. Think Jin Sakai from Ghost of Tsushima. I generally dislike playing as Yasuke from a gameplay perspective, as I favor stealth in Assassin's Creed games, so I tried to pick Naoe as much as I could. Even with just half a character, I still feel like the gameplay delivers the experience we're all wanting, and the exploration felt rewarding and interesting, with small but meaningful side quests and really a variety of objectives and approaches. Where Ghost of Tsushima delivered in story and combat but didn't quite deliver with exploration activities, Assassin's Creed Shadows seems to do the exact opposite, with a much better approach to discovery, activities, and stealth. I feel the main appeal of the Assassin's Creed gameplay formula is its stealth mechanics, and the addition of new difficulty nuance to its stealth is incredibly welcome. You can tune it up to Expert for a really challenging sneaking experience, or put it on Easy and Cruise, both of them without affecting your actual combat experience. I am generally a stealth player, as I like the shinobi style of play, and found it incredibly rewarding and fun, to the point sometimes I would raid random places for loot just because I knew it was nighttime, and it would go better as the shadows embraced me. Enemies can detect you based on sound, and the sound you make while you walk will change if you're on grass or snow, or if you open a door without crouching, or if you're not going prone, etc. The stealth implementation in this game is so much fun. I honestly can't think of a game that it's done better or in a more detailed way. This is a slam dunk for Ubisoft. For those looking for combat focus, the game also has accessibility options that give you chain combos at the press of a button, but in general, it's still all about deflect and parry. Naoe uses a katana, a tanto, a kusarigama, and shinobi tools with effects like bleed, poison, and daze. Yasuke uses a long katana, a naginata polearm, a kanabo war club, a bow, and a teppo firearm. Each of these have their own skill trees, which you grow through by doing activities as either character and applying the points you have spent. Besides the skill trees for each character and weapon or style, there is some mild build crafting in the form of gear bonuses, swappable engravings, gear quality, and gear upgrades. Enemies can be dazed, poisoned, and afflicted by several effects, but it's all pretty lean when compared to the detailed gear options of Odyssey, and it's probably easy to ignore if you aren't playing on hard, but the variety itself is there, and it's likely somewhat above Valhalla, including tips on where to find what engravings so you can target the ones you want right away. In general, the combat has solid conceptualization with interesting movesets and effects. Some of the active skills trigger fancy blood splash effects on black and white ink-like visuals, which feel like a bit of an homage to the Japanese style of art that has inspired so much media. Despite any preferences that I have for stealth combat, Yasuke's samurai performance delivers a quite compelling, fluid, and engaging samurai power fantasy. I think most people that want to engage fully with the combat will thoroughly enjoy his head-on approach and stylish moves that are supported by ranged attacks with bow and teppo that feel quite good and even have haptic feedback. You should not go in expecting cinematic Ghost of Tsushima showdowns or Team Ninja's Rise of the Ronin combat, but this is probably some of the best combat the series has delivered, and it does so with flair. Outside of combat, the gameplay loop is quite diverse and has an excellent mix of practicing your form, relaxing, collecting, and sneaking. Assassin's Creed Shadows gives you a hideout as a base of operations, which acts as the settlement did in Valhalla, but with more flexibility and options for a lot more cosmetic customization. You will also meet and gather allies for your hideout or league, and they will join you in combat if you slot them. These allies are interesting but often strange fitting, with one particular one wearing such weird clothing and spouting such silly dialogue that he reminded me of a comedian in a Japanese bangumi I used to watch. In general, I didn't care much for these side stories, and I ignored all romance options in the game, as the cringe of game romance as a 17-year-old girl was not for me. The hideout decorations, on the other hand, were a great choice and fun addition to the game. Many of the rewards you find out on the landscape or receive from quests are cosmetics for your hideout, which can be quite fun to deck out as you decide where the buildings will go and connect them for smooth transition between pavilions. From there, you will set off to the many provinces and uncover more and more content as you go. With a board full of objectives and investigation quests, extra weekly quests available from the Animus, and seasonal repeatable quests available from your Kakurega, there is an amazing amount of exploration to do. Uncovering the whole map can of course be very daunting, and the Ubisoft team seems to have taken to heart the many criticisms levied their way after their misguided diss at Elden Ring. The result is that guided mode is now not recommended and disables some trophies, the UI is very slimmed down and much more immersive when traversing, and the game gives you clues about where to find people and things, but you have to use scouts and your own discovery to actually locate them. There's also no more follow road, which for me is a negative, as I really liked riding around looking at the landscapes from the previous game, as I didn't have to control where I was looking. Regardless, the core of exploration will either be select a quest and use your season-limited scouts to find the objective, or follow the clues yourself and inspect the locations visually with focus mode as you walk around to find what you want. Naue is also the only one with eagle vision, so your main exploration will be done with her, as she can see through walls and mark distant treasure that way. I really enjoyed navigating the hills and valleys of Japan and discovering towns and temples, collecting lost pages, meditating to ancient rhythms, finding unique and valuable works of art or tea sets, and filling up my inventory with ever more fanciful helms and armor for an endless loop of beautiful fashion designs. I felt like there was a discovery at every corner, and the world came to life with the many NPC villagers, bandits, samurai, and monks roaming about, complete with small flavored dialogues that you could listen into to get clues from where to head next. All in all, the gameplay offers exactly what I wanted in terms of content, depth, and breadth, with the minor annoyance of having to swap between characters for some objectives and missing out on the samurai or shinobi side the rest of the time. The design of Assassin's Creed Shadows is, like its predecessors, well-researched and beautiful. While this is obviously not the real Japan, and there could be many nitpicks about rice paddies, forests, temple costumes, location sizes, and distances, it is still without a doubt the most beautiful realization of a romanticized medieval Japan I have ever played. With 4 distinct seasons that affect not only gameplay mechanics, but entire flora, fauna, and villager behaviors, this is the closest a game gets to what it is like to visit these places in real life. There were, however, some weird or odd choices and some shortcuts or gamey elements, and I was particularly heartbroken to visit the Daibutsuken in Nara and find the game does not show the glorious Buddha statue enshrined there, but overall the world kept calling me back to explore, ride around, find out what was behind the next corner, and greet the next person. With beautiful visuals, the game also has decent performance. PS5 Pro does not support 60 FPS on quality mode, which is the recommended setting, but does on performance mode, where it plays very smoothly. I did most of my playtime on PS5, but I also spent many hours with the PC version. The game looks absolutely stunning on my PC, which is a Ryzen 7950 and a 4090, and it's running between 60 to 90 FPS on 1440p, with everything turned to ultra high and frame gen turned off. It's honestly amazing to see such a huge open world game with so many particle effects, complex NPC behaviors, and detailed tree and hair physics performing at this level of polish. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. The wind moves individual trees and branches based on their weight, the water and floor look amazing, and NPC hair strands flow with the wind. I did note that facial appearance was a bit rough in some places, particularly some cutscenes, as it seemed like they were lacking textures though. On PlayStation, I experienced some crashes early on that the internet says are PlayStation update related and plague many other games, but tinkering with turning off the internet fixed them for me. There are also some small grabs or slows when opening the map after unlocking new objectives, and I had a couple of very small bugs, such as my character looking transparent while riding, or some enemies that had to be assassinated multiple times to stay dead, but overall I have not found any progression bugs and everything works remarkably well for a game of such size and ambition. It is also noteworthy that the game features cross-save, so you can play on your PlayStation and synchronize the save with PC to pick it up on PC right after, which is nice to have. On the audio front, the music was very hit or miss for me, with idle music and tunes feeling relaxing and comforting, and some bizarre out-of-place battle music that accompanied the most important confrontations. The more modern hip-hop and somewhat Chinese tones again left me rather confused, as a game with such attention to detail and polish seems to get randomly derailed by strange creative choices that don't match the atmosphere they have worked so hard to produce. The voice acting in English is passable, but I did not like Naue's English actress for this, and I thoroughly recommend putting the game in immersion mode, as it will lock all voices to the Japanese cast and give you the incredible experience of listening to such an extensive list of famous and capable actors. The Japanese voice acting of Assassin's Creed Shadows is, without a doubt, the best voice acting the series has ever had. Open world games like this don't really rank in replayability, but rather on the amount of content they give you. Assassin's Creed Shadows delivers very good value for money with a beautifully realized world packed full of so much content most people will never complete it all. It takes around 40 hours to complete the main story of the game, but you're looking at another 100 hours on top of that if you want to do every activity and objective. This isn't very surprising since I have 300 or so hours in Valhalla, but the quality of the content in those hours, in my opinion, is slightly superior in Shadows due to the more diverse activity offering in the base game. The side quests and side objectives are quite well done and built interestingly into the world and the real history of the places and people that were there, so you'll most likely enjoy discovering them thanks to the overall polish of the product. There is really a lot of map to explore and a lot of content to do, so if you enjoy getting lost in this world, the game could keep you entertained for months or years, depending on how much time you can put in each week. It's also the kind of game that allows for bite-sized gameplay sessions, as you can play for 30 minutes or an hour and get things done, which isn't always possible with some other large titles. Additional activities such as the free built-in Season Pass that unlocks special modern-day story, materials, and equipment for completing game content signaled to intended ongoing support for the title, which has already announced an upcoming expansion but has cancelled its DLC Season Pass, so it may not get the DLC treatment that Odyssey and Valhalla enjoyed. Despite this, I've seen a lot of feedback from the community here at Fextra Life regarding Assassin's Creed being expensive. The standard edition is $69.99 USD, which is the norm these days, and I personally don't really see a reason to purchase any extras. That said, if you feel that is too expensive or you just want to play through once and forget about the game, you can buy Ubisoft Plus subscription for $18 USD and cancel, giving you access to the game for a month even at launch. All of this said, I feel like there should be a mention to the game's store that sells both cosmetics and some convenience items that have become rather cheeky. For example, while the game warns you that trophies are disabled in guided mode, you can purchase a map of all activities, many of them trophy-related, for 1,000 credits, which is about 10 USD. You can also buy a bunch of fancy mount skins and cute animals to keep as pets for your hideout, as well as stylish clothes for your character. Overall, I wasn't tempted to open or buy from the store or even reminded of it by the game, so I don't think it's intrusive or particularly bad since the content included with the actual game is more than sufficient to keep me entertained. I was annoyed about the activities map, but I find myself not using them anyway. Final thoughts. My Assassin's Creed Shadows experience has both been fantastic and disappointing. The pacing and narrative issues of the dual characters and the immersion-breaking blips you may encounter can mostly be ignored thanks to the fun and engaging combat and the excellently designed stealth and exploration of the world. Hours went by without me noticing as I uncovered more of the map, I met more historical figures, and got lost in the everlasting allure of medieval Japan. I had long stretches where I was fully immersed, only to be suddenly pulled out of this immersion by clumsy storytelling or events, but then I would go back into being immersed once again. This cycle repeated for much of the game. I had hoped that this would be my favorite Assassin's Creed, but when I sit back and reflect on my experience, I find that the narrative and story brings down the score average, but the core of the experience is somewhat similar to what has been offered in previous titles, and will give players a similar amount of enjoyment. This will mean different things to a lot of different people, as the density and abundance of sometimes thin content is not appealing to all. For me, that meant that despite its story stumbles, the gameplay kept bringing me back, and I'm still playing long after the credits rolled, as I'm working on getting yet another Assassin's Creed Platinum and plan to 100% every possible temple and shrine, so I can make a list of the ones I have yet to visit in real life.